Jimmy Carter, former President of the United States, has reached 100. Happy birthday, Mr. President. How is his presidency regarded today? And how did his relationship with Zbigniew Brzezinski, his national security advisor, shape our world? And what was their part in the collapse of the Iron Curtain here in Europe? Do join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
Former US President Jimmy Carter has turned 100. His single-term presidency is remembered more for the crises during its time and for its shortcomings, despite Carter having significant achievements in diplomacy and having contributed to the fall of communism in Poland.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
When Jimmy Carter assumed the presidency in 1977, the Cold War was in full swing. The president sought to shift the focus away from a purely military containment of the Soviet Union to one that emphasized human rights, diplomacy, and engagement with dissident movements in Eastern Europe. This strategy became particularly important in Poland, where the regime's control over the population was becoming increasingly fragile due to economic struggles and growing dissatisfaction among the working class. Zbigniew Brzezinski, Carter's national security advisor, played an instrumental role in shaping US policy towards the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Born in Poland, Brzezinski had a deep personal connection to the region and a profound understanding of the dynamics within Eastern Europe. Poland, Brzezinski's homeland, became a focal point of US efforts during Carter's presidency. The country was under a satellite government aligned with the Soviet Union, but dissatisfaction was growing due to widespread economic hardship and political repression. By the late 1970s, the rise of the Solidarity movement, a trade union and social movement led by Lech Wałęsa, signaled a significant challenge to Soviet control in Eastern Europe. Carter and Brzezinski understood the importance of solidarity and offered diplomatic support to the movement. By 1989, Solidarity had forced the Polish government to hold free elections, a move that accelerated the collapse of communist regimes across Eastern Europe. This in turn led to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, events that symbolized the end of the Iron Curtain and the Cold War itself.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest once more to the programme, Tomasz Płodowski. He's an Associate Professor at the University of Economics and Human Sciences in Warsaw. Welcome once more to the programme. Great to have you.
Pleasure.
We're going to be discussing Jimmy Carter, the presidency of Jimmy Carter, who's had this 100th birthday, and later on move on to his relationship with Zbigniew Brzezinski, National Security Advisor. But first of all, President Carter himself seems to get a rough press from historians and commentators as being one of these not successful presidents. Given the passage of time, how would you evaluate his presidency? Has he been rehabilitated, for example, in the overall scheme of things? What's your evaluation?
It seems so. I mean, I think he had a lot of bad luck. I like him personally. I think he was a good person, which is quite important. He was seen as not that successful. He was rated as below average president. And that's partly because he wasn't re-elected. He was one of the few presidents that were not re-elected. Plus, towards the end of the 70s, there was a large number of global crises, and he did not deal with them successfully. All of them. Some of it was bad luck. For example, the Iran hostage crisis and the helicopters crashing on the desert, and just the whole story being found out by the Iran government. And everybody basically in the world, obviously the Russians, the Soviets, were very happy to see that failure, and this was a prolonged failure seen on television
was he
for a long time.
Was he seen to be outfoxed by his competitors on the world stage?
Well, I mean, it's a complicated story. I would say that in hindsight, his presidency is seen as much more successful. And, for example, in this part of the world, you would say that it contributed to a large extent to what happened in the region, to the changes in the region, to the human rights, for example, in Eastern Europe, in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and so on and so forth. So I would say that overall he wasn't as bad as he was thought to be right at the end of his presidency. But he wasn't re-elected, and I would say a lot of it was, again, bad luck. But there was really, I don't think there was any president that had more global issues to deal with, like the oil crisis towards the end of the 70s.
Yes.
So voters, we know, that look basically at leaders through according to the pocketbook, theory, they look through the prism of their pockets. So if oil prices go up, all prices go up. So that wasn't that basically contributed to the fact that he wasn't re-elected as well. But he had a lot of success with ending the Egypt-Israel conflict.
The Camp David stuff there.
Yes, bringing people, leaders from Egypt and Israel to Camp David, the famous peace talks that were very successful. So there was a number of issues that he helped resolve, but at the same time he wasn't seen. He was an outsider basically from the very beginning. He was seen as he was a peanut farmer. He was a modest man, even though he went to the Navy. He was quite successful. He was a self-made man, which is a very popular idea in the United States. Trump isn't a self-made man, even though he claims to be.
When comparing him to, in terms of the personality that he came, a very pious, religious man, long marriage, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, was he the right personality for the presidency? Why was he elected in the first place? What was his ticket?
Well, I think he was very hardworking. He was a very aggressive campaigner. He had a political campaign. He had a political career. He was a Georgia state senator. He was a governor from Georgia. And he was very good at campaigning at the beginning. I mean, he was very aggressive. He went everywhere before everybody else. All the states, had a large number of meetings, met lots of people, which is like this direct form of campaign is very important. But then, he ran it. He made some mistakes. There were some controversies. He said some things that he shouldn't have said back then. Now we would probably look at those controversies very differently. The Playboy interview.
Yes, committing adultery in his heart, that kind of thing.
Yes, looking at women other than his wife with lust. And there was a lot of backlash against him. He said something about understanding also a need in a community, I think, for an ethnic purity, something like that. This was related to the idea of injecting black families into white neighborhoods, so that it was also misunderstood, or it was at least sounded controversial.
Yes. He was a champion of civil rights, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a champion of civil rights and human rights in our part of the world. So I didn't think that he was that he could be accused of being a racist, or he was honest. He was basically being honest in the Playboy interview, but it probably wasn't the right time and the right place to say it, right before the election. And so his popularity fell, his ratings fell slightly, and he only marginally won with Ford. Also, Ford's mistakes during the famous debate helped him, because Ford made this really major mistake, which he repeated several times during the debate, saying that he's just come back from Romania, Yugoslavia, and Poland, and he can reassure everyone that these countries are not under Soviet influence, right? So this was really a strange thing to say. How can the U.S. president not understand a major global conflict, between the East and the West? And he repeated that. There was a journalist, one of the hosts of the debate, that asked him if he understood right, and he repeated that, yes. And like if anybody missed that, then
yes,
he heard it again.
Yes, it's like the discussion we had weeks back about the importance of debates or not importance.
Yes, definitely.
This is one of those key moments. So President Carter is elected, and from the late 70s to the early 80s. Zbigniew Brzezinski is his national security advisor. On the face of it, it seems an odd match. This kind of very the realist school of geopolitics. Zbigniew Brzezinski, peanut farmer, self-made man, simple guy on the face of it, from the presidents. How did this team work? Was the chemistry between them? Did it function?
Well, I mean, they were obviously very different. This is an important pair in American politics, American foreign policy, especially the president and the person that he chooses as his national security advisor. So there are famous examples like Nixon and Kissinger before that, and then, I don't know, Clinton and Madeleine Albright. And it's interesting that all those national security advisors came from our part of the world, right? Kissinger was German. Brzezinski was born in Poland, although he left when he was, 2 or 3 years old. Albright was Czech, and Albright was Brzezinski's student at Columbia University, so there's a lot of overlap. And, they worked better or worse, and their ideas changed. Kissinger and Nixon, they pushed for détente and for disarmament, SALT 1, SALT 2, and so on, the arms treaty, arms treaties, yes. Right? And I think Brzezinski had a very different idea. Coming from Poland, he was very what a lot of Westerners accuse Poles of being anti-Soviet. We have good reasons. I don't think it's being anti-Soviet, it's being realistic. And he pushed for a more realistic approach towards Russia, and he was a hardliner, you could say. Yes. Right? He believed in being strong, but he also pushed for human rights, which helped our region a lot. Poland, Helsinki Accords, Charter 77 in the Czech Republic. So all those changes, they worked together, and what Brzezinski worked on contributed to Carter's legacy. For example, doctrines very often are authored by national security advisors, and the Carter doctrine was authored by Brzezinski, right? So he asserted, and you can see continuity also. And if you look at the big picture, you basically see that what happens under one president has consequences under another, right? So the Carter doctrine was about reserving itself, the U.S. reserving itself, the right to intervene in the Persian Gulf to protect its interests, right? So you can see that what happened after that. Yeah.
What was the legacy of the presidential visit to Poland in the late 70s? Of President Carter. How did he leave his mark here in Eastern Europe? Okay, he had a few gaffes, dramatic gaffes, the famous ones, but it was a serious visit by a serious president. Yes,
but Brzezinski always prepared Carter for international visits and public speeches, and they worked closely, and they worked on the Helsinki Accords, and they would meet with local leaders, but they would definitely push for opening the Soviet system, right? More rights for the opposition, freedom of speech, things like that. So this is a serious legacy of Carter that went into that changed history, basically, right? He was pushing towards Poland and the Soviets opening, well, mostly Poland, opening the system for the opposition. So that strengthened that visit, and not just this particular visit, but there were more visits later on. They prepared grounds for the collapse of the Berlin Wall.
Another chink in the armor, I suppose.
Yes.
Why did the Polish authorities invite President Carter in the first place, knowing what his outlook was, do you think?
Well, I think Polish authorities, well, I mean, he's far from being the only one that came here. I mean, Ford came here, Republican presidents came here. Basically, almost every American president would come here. So they would all, if there was a controversial part of the visit, for example, meeting with Lech Wałęsa, the Solidarity leader, that was basically absent from the media, then they would try to hide it, but they would still let, I don't know if they could let or not let, but if the US president or anybody like that want to meet with Lech Wałęsa, he would, but it would not be present in the media. So they were probably afraid of that. They were afraid of John Paul II. They were afraid of his visit in Poland, and was it 78 or 79? They were afraid of even pop stars meeting, I don't know, whoever came, Elton John, whoever came to Poland, they would want to meet with Lech Wałęsa, and the authorities would obviously censor the media to pretend that Lech Wałęsa was a private figure, that he was not anybody special, he did not really fulfill or perform an important political function. So I think they were afraid, but still they wanted to maintain relations with the US, with the West, and they wanted to open, obviously under Gierek, they wanted to open Poland to Western technologies, to
money.
Yeah, money. And they did try. I mean, Poland was different. It definitely changed in the 70s. But a lot of this money, a lot of those loans from Western banks, they were basically wasted because they were misinvested in old technologies and so on and so forth. So we were opening up, especially during the town, that started under Kissinger and Nixon. Remember Nixon's visit to Poland, going through the streets of Warsaw, the center of Warsaw, with Poles waving, you know, in ecstasy almost. In those times, the U.S. was a symbol of freedom, and we really bought into this ideology, American ideology, right, of being the leader of the free world. I mean, it was definitely much freer than we were.
Yes. The President Carter has this long period after his presidency of philanthropy and being this elder statesman of the world. Is that somehow a more successful period than his actual presidency, would you say?
He's seen as being a better post-president than president. And he also he's the only one that lived to be 100, so he had a lot of time in which to improve his legacy.
4-year legacy, and he's 100 years old.
Yes.
How would you mark him if you were to hang one great achievement, either president or post-president? How would you characterize Jimmy Carter? Is the man who did what?
Who gave Poland free speech and solidarity. I think that's a lot.
That's not a bad thing to have as an epitaph.
Definitely. I mean, obviously he wasn't the only one. They worked together. There is something to it. It's totally exaggerated, but there's something to it that it was John Paul II, I don't know, Brzezinski, Reagan, Thatcher, and so on. Obviously, history does not happen so easily. It's not 3 people making a phone call. These are long processes that work together. But Brzezinski was critical, crucial, and they did make those phone calls, and they came close to what they thought was a Third World War. For example, one morning, I think at 3 a.m., he was woken up by a phone call that said that the Russians launched, was it hundreds of nuclear weapons, right? And it turned out to be false alarm, but I mean, those were difficult times. I'm sure they missed many a night of sleep. It wasn't as bad as the Kennedy,
the Cuban crisis. Yeah. It's like Harold Macmillan said. He was asked what were the things that he found most difficult, and he replied to a journalist, "Events, dear boy, events." I mean, that's something that presidents have no control over.
Yes, the unexpected.
The unexpected. Professor Płodowski, thank you very much once more for coming onto the programme.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So that's it. That's all we have time for today. Keep watching TVP World, but do join us again for How We Got Here.